coming, guys. You know, I won't have to do much talking because look who you got to the left of me, which is a good thing. Everybody knows the two Steves, Grover Norquist, Mr. Bratt, fresh from Congress, and now in academia, which is a good thing. I'm just going to start it off here with a subject that's near and dear to my heart, Bidenomics. Now, just for me, and see if you guys agree, Bidenomics reminds me of the definition of pornography. Although, unlike pornography, you don't get momentarily, aroused from it, okay? But it is one of these squishy things, right, that you kind of know it when you see it, right? Wasn't that the Potter Stewart definition of pornography? But, if there's anybody that can really put some meat on the bones, it's you guys. I'll start with you, Mr. Forbes. What is Bidenomics?
Well, the Bidenomics is very simple. It's another word, synonym for bad. Anything that can harm the economy, it will do. The whole point of the American experiment in terms of economics is enabling people, as Lincoln put it, to improve your lot in life, removing barriers to people getting ahead, doing things, providing opportunity. And so you don't raise taxes, you don't debase the money, you don't pile on regulations, you don't pervert science for some cult-like thinking and projects. And so they're doing everything they can to make sure the American economy becomes modern socialism. Old socialism, as you know, Marxism, they thought they had to own what they called the means of production. The modern socialists know that if you have extensive regulations, you get the best of socialism because you control the ability of these entities to survive, but also they take the blame when things go wrong. So the auto industry's now become a virtual part of the federal government. Those three companies in Detroit are going to need bailouts soon because of these, not only just the labor negotiations, but this forced march to EVs, electronic vehicles. So Bidenomics is the opposite of what makes an economy to work. And if you asked our adversaries to devise a program to hurt the mightiest nation in the world, you would have what they're doing. The Federal Reserve believing that the way you fight inflation is by depressing the economy. Inflation is two things. Either you hurt the means of production, like lockdown, so that raises the price of things. And the real classical inflation is reducing the value of the currency, usually by creating too much of it. And so in terms of the Federal Reserve, stabilize the dollar. Stop trashing the dollar. And the other thing is in terms of, and so they have this thing called the Phillips curve. It's not a pitch. It's the idea that you fight it, that if you want more employment, you have to have more inflation. If you want less inflation, you have to have more unemployment. It's perverse. They think if you want low inflation, you have to have more unemployment. If you want less unemployment, you have to have more inflation. That's the Phillips curve. And so the Federal Reserve believes you have to make people poorer to fight inflation. Well, that'll bring prices down, ladies and gentlemen, because when you make people poor, they can't buy as much. But then what happens is, then the prices come down, then they ease up again, debase the dollar again, and we have this unvirtuous circle. So Bidenomics, bad. Anything they do, do the opposite.
Okay, so I'm old enough to remember there was a set definition, more or less, for Reaganomics. It was King Dollar. It was, low taxes. It was sort of demonstrated by the Laffer curve as opposed to the Phillips curve. Can we get a definition of Bidenomics? I mean, is that possible here? Or is it just like nailing Jell-O to the wall?
No, two sentences. They want to tax, regulate, or prohibit things that you want, and they want to subsidize or mandate things you're not interested in.
It's a good summary.
And the rest is just how they steal the money to pay for all that nonsense.
So EVs, there's no practical usage of EVs. They're just here because the government is subsidizing it.
Some EVs might exist in the world without subsidies or without mandates, but the numbers they're counting on, no.
Steve, take a crack.
So I brought actually some slides, 2 or 3 slides to show you what Bidenomics is. So can you put those up? They call this the Bidenomics calamity.
Calamity.
So the first chart.
You notice how the arrow's going down, and
Yeah,
it's
you
red.
can see it on both
Okay,
sides.
very good.
The next chart, please. So this is Bidenomics. We've spent, and by the way, you know, Republicans like to spend money too, okay? I'm not here
We're
to
going to get into that in a little bit, okay?
They're not the solution to our problem, but you can just see what we've done to our fiscal situation here with the massive spending that is unprecedented. We've spent over $7 trillion now on COVID and post-COVID. By the way, adjusted for inflation, that's more money than we fought to fight and win World War II. Oh, by the way, can we all agree that we will never, 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 never allow the government to shut down our businesses again, and never shut down our schools, and never shut down our churches? This was the most horrendous mistake, I think, in the history of this country.
Who did it, though?
What's that?
Who shut us down? Who shut us down?
Who shut it down? I'll tell you, remember it was 14 days to stop the spread? Remember that? 14 days to turn it.
No. Who, I mean, there's the elephant in a room here, so to speak. I know Andrew Cuomo deserves some blame for this. I know Gavin Newsom deserves some blame. And, you know, when you listen to Ron DeSantis carefully, he should probably say this more, doesn't Donald Trump deserve some blame for it? He had Anthony Fauci at his side talking about lockdowns and, you know, being wishy-washy on it.
It's a good point. And, you know, I was in the Oval Office a couple times with Trump during COVID, and he made a mistake, no question, in shutting down the economy. But I'll tell you one thing. The thing that he did right was that he wanted to get the economy reopened. And what he did was really smart. He said, we're going to let the states decide whether or not to open or not. And what happened as a consequence, Governor DeSantis, with a few exceptions, all the red states opened up and all the blue states collapsed their economy. And that was the real tragedy.
Wasn't his messaging muddled on that? I've always thought it was a mistake to have, at least after the first couple of months, Dr. Fauci, a notorious lockdown, at his side all the time.
I've told President Trump this. The biggest mistake you made as president was not firing Anthony Fauci, who is a villain. Let me just show one other quick slide, and then I'll turn it over to David.
Okay.
Can you show the next slide? There's the increase, the massive increase in spending that's going to take us to 200% of GDP. That is a catastrophe if we allow that to happen. It's never happened before in the history of this country. It's a recipe for disaster. One other one, and then I'll turn it over to David. Why are people so angry right now? Why is it that for the last 2 years, every poll, Charles, every single poll has shown that 70% of Americans believe the American economy is headed in the wrong direction? It doesn't matter if it's a Fox poll, CNBC poll, MSNBC poll. And the other thing that the polls show consistently over the last 2 years, 70% of Americans say their personal finances are worse off today than they were when Trump was president. And the reason for that, the top blue line is the pace of inflation. The bottom blue line is the pace of wages and salaries. One last chart, and this I'll stop. This is just showing, well, that's under Trump, we got a $6,000 increase in median income, and the final one, show the next one, under Biden, $4,000 reduction. That is why Donald Trump is going to be a reelected president. He's going to look in the camera and he's going to say, just as Ronald Reagan did, remember this, Steve Forbes? He said, remember what he said when he debated Jimmy Carter? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And for the vast majority of Americans, the answer to that is no.
Well, is there anything left to add to Biden? I'm only kidding. I'm sure you have your opinion of it. But let me ask you this. Bidenomics, or Biden would say, hey, look at the last 3 months. 240,000 jobs created. That ain't bad. 4.9% GDP. Well, that's pretty damn good. And inflation, okay, it's bad, but it's coming down. Isn't Bidenomics working?
Well, I'll go to the definition first, just a one-liner. And all these views are my own. I don't speak on behalf of any institution, party, person, whatever, because those are my little caveat. But Bidenomics is the intentional takedown of the United States of America. This is not ruled by folks who are well-intentioned. The old liberals on the faculty 20, 30 years ago, you could have a good conversation about the size, scope of government. This is the intentional takedown of freedom, which is the cardinal virtue in our political society, right? So it's the takedown. Everything all these three geniuses just said proves that. Your point, yeah, all the economic statistics are just great right now. It is true. Nominal growth is like 7 or 8%. But do a little thought experiment. Take $8 trillion, which is still left on the Federal Reserve balance sheet. Take $8 trillion away. Take $2 trillion in deficit spending, which is stimulative. that's in CBO, right? This is not right-wing economics. This is CBO, $2 trillion stimulative deficits for the next 10 years, right? So you take that away, that stimulus away from our real economy. Everyone talks about the stock market, blah, blah, blah. What matters for the next generation is the real economy. That's made up of capital investment, not financial capital.
I left that out. The stock market's up like 20% or something.
Human capital and technological growth. Productivity, 70 years ago, used to be 6, 5, 4%, then 3, 2, 1%. Now it's 1%. Government productivity is negative, as all these gentlemen know. And so whether it's the green space, the EV space, the regulatory piece, all of it. This country was founded on liberty. We are supposed to all be protected, right, with inalienable rights that come from God, and the government is supposed to protect that sphere of freedom where we get to act out our lives as individuals. There are no free markets left, right? They're gone. I yearn for the day, and so you got to starve the beast, like Ronald Reagan said.
So you don't want to define it by Bidenomics?
Oh, it's the intentional takedown of the United States of America.
Okay.
It's intentional, too. That's the hot political. This is not by accident. It's by design.
It's true. Grover.
I want to be cheerful for one moment.
Okay.
In Washington, D.C., there's a lot to be uncheerful about. At best, we have marginal control of the House. The Democrats own the Senate and the presidency. But if you go to the 57 states, the red states, 23, are completely Republican. Republican governor, both houses. The yellow states here want to be red, but they have a Democratic governor. Louisiana finally ran a candidate for governor with girlfriends in the single digits, so we got to win Louisiana back. This is where we're making progress. There are 12 states that have decided we're going to go to zero, like Florida. 7 states are at zero. 12 states are moving to zero. They've actually passed the laws.
On income tax?
On income tax, personal income tax, state personal income tax. Huge steps forward, real opportunities there, and people are moving into those states that are either at zero or going to zero. Cheerful map here shows the number of flat rate. The yellow states are flat rate, 12 flat rate states. It's very easy to take a single rate tax down because everybody benefits. Very difficult to raise a single rate tax because you have to look everybody in the state in the eye and say, I'm going to tax you all. That's why Illinois, which is run by Bolsheviks, is under 5%. It's under 5% because it's a single rate tax, and for the Democrats to raise taxes in Illinois, they have to take on everyone. So this is the Richard Speck theory of tax increases, that you can't take on everybody in the room. You take them out of the room one at a time. That's what progressive taxes are for, so they can say, I'm going to get these two, and then you guys later. This is real progress. And then lastly, reason to be happy about the national level, and this should be in everybody's packets. From 1932 until 1994, 62 years, the Democrats had the House and the Senate, except there were 4 years where the Republicans ran Congress. 4, 2 under Truman, 2 under Eisenhower. We had a one-party state. Since Congress runs America, presidents have scandals and start wars. But Congress does taxes, laws, regulations, all that stuff. Since 94, when 96% of Republicans at the national level, Congress, took the pledge and kept it. Since 94, there's been no tax increase as long as the Republicans had either house of Congress. Only a united Democratic Party has been able to raise taxes because the Republicans have all said, we may invade small countries we can't pronounce, but we will not raise your taxes. And that has made all the difference. Now we run Congress half the time, which means there's a limit to the damage they can do. So we are cheerfully in a better position than we used to be, but not where we need to be.
Great stuff. I always love your stuff. And thank you for making me not drink early today because I was getting very depressed listening to everybody else. But Steve, you ran for president. You were a politician. You remember the dark old days of Jimmy Carter? I do, because my old man was out of... My dad was a construction worker who was out of work a lot during the 70s because we had stagflation, right? So stagflation doomed Jimmy Carter because you just didn't have just inflation. You had an economic slowdown for lots of reasons, including an oil shock and monetary policy that sucked, let's face it, right? But it was stagflation. We don't have stagflation now. Biden is going to run on 4.5, whatever that number was, 4.2% GDP, low unemployment. Isn't it going to be hard to beat him?
If you,
I mean, if he doesn't fall asleep during the debates, I get that part.
well, first of all, Biden is not going to be the Democratic nominee in 2024. In spring, he's going to do what Lyndon Johnson did in 1968. He's going to withdraw. He's not going to do it voluntarily, but some are going to come in, even though his wife, who goes by the nickname of Mrs. Wilson now, they're going to say you're the most progressive president since Franklin Roosevelt. Time to call it a day, because the Hunter Biden stuff, despite all the smoke they're trying to throw up,
it's horrible stuff.
It's coming home to roost. The economy's not going to be that good, and Biden's failings in terms of mental and physical are going to become so manifest. I think it was John Fund talked about how in the Biden entourage today, they have 6 people assigned to make sure that when he's on a stage, they make sure he doesn't fall, that he doesn't walk off the stage, that they can guide him to the right place and prevent bad things from happening. And their nickname are the Fall Guys. That's the situation today. So he's not going to be the nominee.
Who's going to run? Gavin Newsom?
They're going to try to put in somebody like Gavin Newsom.
He's got nice hair, but he shut down the whole state. Who's going to run?
Well, he wrecked the state, but California's still a blue state. So they're going to run him, largest state. They may try somebody else, unknown, like they did with Jimmy Carter in 1976.
So they're going to get rid of Kamala Harris and blow up the Democratic coalition, which she helps represent.
Well, if she brings any votes to the ticket, you can probably count them on one hand. But in terms of, so he won't be the nominee. And the key thing for Republicans, and which is so surprising, is that none of the candidates have come up with a radical, say, a tax cut plan or something else that people can grasp onto. If you mention any of their names, oh yeah, we're for tax cuts, check. We're for this, check. But none of them come up with the way Reagan did in 1980 when he proposed a 30% across-the-board income tax rate cut, when he proposed rebuilding our military, proposed domestic spending cuts. He had a real program to open up the oil and gas. He had a real program. None of these people have a standout. Now, I know there's some good political consultants in this room, so I exempt you. But those candidates should fire their consultants and realize if you want to win, look at how Reagan did it. Stand for something that people can get around and look to the future. Reagan said we had problems in the present, but we also need a future. And this is very important. We're talking about taxes and spending, but also you have to have a president with backbone who understands we do have a deep state. We do have, and that's why they don't care if Biden falls or not, if Kamala Harris took over, because the bureaucracy now runs the government, which is why you get all these regulations, ceiling fans, anything you like, as Grover touched on, they want to take away. Even in New York, they want to take away pizzas, for crying out loud.
Coal oven pizzas.
So that's you have to have a president with backbone who understands you got to tackle inside, and that takes real work. The deep state's going to fight and fight back hard.
So Charlie, there's another element to that question you asked Steve about, okay, we had high GDP growth. We actually do have a lot of jobs out there. There's no question about a low unemployment rate. But, you know, that's why I mentioned this fact that 7 out of 10 Americans are not happy with the way things are going. And I got to tell you, you know, when I just go to the store or walk on, people will literally come up to me and say, why do you keep going on Fox Business and saying inflation's only 4 or 5%? How many of you think inflation is only 4 or 5%? How many of you think it's higher than 4 or 5%?
No.
Almost everyone does.
Steve, inflation is 4 or 5%, but let's be real clear here.
It's what?
It is 4 or 5%, but prices are as high as they were when it was 8%.
Right.
That is what's missing from the economic, quite frankly, the journalistic economic commentary, that we are not saying that the rate of inflation is going down, but prices are still where they were when it was 10%.
The inflation rate has come down, but my point, let me give you an example.
But prices are still too damn high, so to speak.
But look at, for example, you know, the mortgage rate. The mortgage rate was 3% when Trump left office. Today it's 7.8%. So I just did these calculations to give you a sense of how this is affecting people. So you're a new, let's say you're 35 years old. You're a first-time home buyer. You want to buy, say, a median value home in the United States. your mortgage payment when Trump was president on that house would be about $1,300 to $1,400 a month. You know what it is now? $2,600 a month. So those are the kinds of things that aren't really reflected in this inflation rate. So why people get so, I mean, my God, my wife gets so mad. She goes, Steve, you don't have no idea what things cost, because she does most of the shopping. So like a couple weeks ago,
Sure.
You're going to the grocery store with me. $8 for Cocoa Krispies? I mean, come on, these prices are unbelievably expensive.
It's even worse for Big Mac meals. The whole meal's $18 for crying out loud.
My only point is people are angry.
Just saying, I spent some time with Bernie Marcus the other day. There's a whole interview I did with him. It's going to be on foxbusiness.com coming up. Snippets are out there. And he told me about McDonald's, like $30 for like a family of four Happy Meal. Let me just kind of redirect this back to
By the way, one thing on those statistics you cited about the greatness of Bidenomics. You look at those
I'm
job
just playing
reports.
devil's advocate. Don't make me as economic
You just look at those job reports. You notice the last one, they downgraded August and September. Suddenly 100,000 jobs disappear. The thing that, and 50,000 of these new jobs created came out of government. And there's several thousand. And then you look at their two surveys, household survey and what they call the establishment survey.
Yep.
Establishment survey said 150,000. You look at the household survey, which is fluctuates wildly each month, but it does give you a sense of what small businesses are doing. That was bad last month, was negative this month.
Yep.
So he's got a sort of a Potemkin village out there.
Yeah, he
it's
does.
not real.
Okay, so on top of that, the Fed has raised rates how many times? I can't remember.
Too many on the mistaken theory that making you poor makes us richer.
They might do one more. They might do three more. Definitely, they're trying to slow down the economy. There's no doubt about that.
Why?
I'm not saying. Listen, don't help me. Don't get into why in a minute. But I want to ask you this: What are we going to have a recession next year? And how deep? If you think yes.
Well, why don't you take a swing at that? Do you think we're going to have a recession?
Yeah, well, I've been wrong for 2 years. We should be in recession already, but you can, as an economist, right? And I'm writing a book called Populist Economics, and all it does is describes the world around you. If you'll notice, there are no economists writing about the implications of being $50 trillion in debt in 10 years. There's no, and this is true, right? You go Google. Right now, we're doing $7 trillion government budgets. So the one thing I would want to know is what's the old, the Keynesian cross from Macro 101? What's the multiplier on government spending? Turns out it's negative now. It has a huge negative impact on our economy. There are no economists talking about 10 million illegal immigrants through the border.
So if you put that on top of tighter credit conditions, Grover, we got to have a recession next year, correct?
Look, it doesn't look good. There are certain things we can do in the House, and you saw this where the House said we're going to give Israel $14.5 billion, but we're going to offset it, pay for it, not with tax increases, which some people suggested, but with reducing the number of IRS agents that they hire. They passed that, sent it over to our friends in the Senate and the White House. We did this once before for debt ceiling, and the Republicans said we're taking $20 billion of the $80 billion off the table for the IRS. So that's become the piggy bank, and we need to keep going back at that, because this is an agency. I don't know if you've seen the parade of horribles, but the IRS a couple years ago destroyed 30 million documents. Okay, if you piled them up here, it'd be 2 miles high. They won't tell Congress how they destroyed them, why they destroyed them, exactly what they were. And then they said, but it won't affect anyone. And they started to send people threatening letters. How come your 1099 is missing? Well, because you burned it, buried it, shredded it, something.
So you don't
they
think...
haven't reformed anything, and they want $80 billion.
So you don't think we're going to have a recession because we're going to fire IRS agents? I mean,
no. We may well have a recession. I'm just walking through. There are some bites at the apple we can take, and we ought to take all of them, and we do as well as we can. But right now, we're on a bad path.
Steve, you're an economist. Put on your hat, recession or not, and how deep
Look, I never root against the American economy, and I will say this. I mean, we have the most incredible businesses in the world, incredibly innovative businesses that despite every single weight that Biden has put on the back of businesses, they find a way to make money. It's a tribute to the small businessmen and women in this room. That's why I love Job Creators Network. I mean, we should be flying. Let me just show you what, can you put up the charts again? I want to show one more chart because this is maybe the most important one of all. and this has to do something, this one. So this is sorry, it's Nancy Pelosi. So you see this is an amazing story, and it needs to be told. Every single American needs to know this. You see the green line that starts in 2007, it goes up to, it peaks in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, that is American oil and gas output. Ooh. And we went from, Charles, 4 million barrels a day to 12 million barrels a day in 12 years. That was something that if you'd asked anybody, around 2005, could America possibly triple its oil and gas output? Steve, everybody would have said that's completely impossible, right? It's impossible. What happened? Yeah. We had something called the shale oil and gas revolution, which is probably the most important innovation of the last 20 years. So, and by the way, Trump was all in on this. I remember from our first, when Larry Kudlow and I first sat down with Trump, we said, if you, Donald, he was not president at that time, if you go all in on American energy, you can make America energy independent. And you say, I want America to be energy dominant. But we were dominant. Look at that. The red line is Russia oil output. The yellow line is Saudi oil output. For the first time in any of our lifetimes, unless you're 98 years old in this room, the United States was the #1 producer of oil and gas. And that line would be going straight up. That trend would have continued if Trump had been president. Biden comes in, and by the way, the American people are responsible for this. Biden's doing exactly what he said he would. Do you remember in the debate?
Oh, yeah.
When he said, I'm going to destroy the American oil and gas industry. Yeah. And voters, for some reason, they actually voted for him. So how many of you have heard something called net zero? Raise your hand if you've heard net zero.
I know a lot about net zero. I could talk about net zero.
This is the most sinister, diabolical idea the left has ever come up.
Right, we're going to get into that. Can you hold that thought? Because I'm going to get into ESG investing in a bit.
They want to take us to zero. That would completely destroy the economy.
One important point, and the reason I think we have a political realignment going on in this country that's massive, is that if you ask half the country, the Job Creators Network, the small business people, they will say we are in recession.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if you look at the distribution of income, inflation, if you have inflation of 10, 10, 10, that means prices have gone up 30%. So even though the inflation rate is 10, that's the point we're getting at. The American people are ticked off. Axios and everyone's had articles. Why are the American people ticked off? Because they know what prices are still, right? So even though the inflation rate is still only going up by 4, it went up by 10 and then 8 and then 7 and 6 and 5 and 4 for a long time. Yeah. And then on top of that, if you take our top 5 tech firms and look at the market cap of our big 5 tech firms that overweight the entire stock market, right? Mm-hmm. They're worth more than all European firms combined. That's not more than their tech firms. Our big 5 tech firms have a market cap greater than all European firms combined. So, okay, so America's getting rich, nominal GDP growth is 8, real is 4. The American people don't buy that for 1 second. They say, my family has had flat wages for 40 years, we're ticked off, and luckily, our party is positioned now to go after them. And it's the Dems, right? We're not the country club Republicans anymore. Those days are gone. Now the Dems are the elites in charge of controlling your life, in charge of socialism, and destroying the American dream, as Steve just got done saying. So we're in recession as far as I'm concerned, if you're speaking on behalf of the American people, and we need a message to their pain.
That's a great point.
And it really doesn't matter what the economic theologians say, whether in recession or not.
So it doesn't matter what I say?
People feel they're in a recession or they fear a recession. They have no faith in the future, and that's what counts.
Yep. It is remarkable that the New York Times can run story after story about how great the economy is, and then right next to a poll that Joe Biden is doing lousy on the economy, and they don't see any irony in there. Let's talk about debt. You know, Stan Druckenmiller is a guy I know. I've been covering him for years. He's one of the great American investors. He was actually George Soros's number 2. Like, he worked for Soros. They're nothing alike politically. Druckenmiller says that we're heading for a fiscal cliff because of debt. Like gazillions of debt are due in the coming years. 14% of the budget goes to paying debt. I mean, these are really scary numbers. Biden has been horrific on this. Obviously, he's been spending what he doesn't have and much more. Trump wasn't that better. in this sense. He was spending a lot. He never dealt with fiscal responsibility, let's face it. And he did do, especially during the pandemic, when we were coming out of the pandemic, one of his last edicts was essentially to push through another big spending bill. First off, I'd like to ask everybody here, do you believe that there's a debt time bomb? That's number one. And number two, why would Donald Trump be the guy to diffuse that based on his prior record? Let's start with you, Mr. Brad.
Well, I think because he's got guts, and once he sees the problem, he will tackle it. He's tackled other major problems.
So you think he's going to have a fiscal responsibility awakening?
Yeah, I do. Anybody out here watch Bannon in the War Room? Yeah, all right. Does he go off on the debt every day as the #1 issue after the border? So there's a little hint as to what's coming your way. But Reinhardt and Rogoff from Harvard wrote a book, This Time is Different, meaning it's not different. He said if you get past 100% debt to GDP, cross-country studies over 100 years, you're in trouble.
But we're more.
We're way past it. And so the basic math, $50 trillion in debt in 10 years, CBO, 5% interest rate. The interest payments for 1 year on that debt are $2.5 trillion. When I was in Congress, the entire budget was $5 trillion. Interest payments for 1 year in 10 years will be $2.5 trillion. It's clearly unsustainable. We will default on the debt, right? 10% of you own 90% of the stocks, bonds, pension funds, right? The top 10% own 90%. They're not going to get a haircut. The rich aren't going to get a haircut. So how are they going to do it? They're going to try to end inflation right now because that's the most toxic political variable right now for Biden next year. So they'll try to rein in inflation somewhat as much as they can for the political cycle. But then they'll run 4 to 5% inflation so they pay back their debt with cheaper dollars. And that's what's coming.
See, I disagree with that. I think they don't care as much. I think they're going to try to spend more. They're going to try to sneak in more spending to push off the recession that we all think will likely
that can go with it. No, that's right. That can go along with that story.
Okay.
But you can't grow your way out of $50 trillion in debt.
Well,
try that.
Steve,
I don't
let me
agree
ask
with
you
that.
this. Okay.
I agree with everything you said except the end. Look, right now, if you look at those forecasts, even the one that I put up, which has us going to 2% of GDP, that is based on the economists in Washington, assuming that you know where I'm going with this, Steve, right? They're assuming, and I learned this stuff from Steve Forbes, but that's assuming that the economy is going to grow at 1.7% per year. And I say, hell no, we're America. We're not going to grow at 1.7%. We're going to grow at 3 to 3.5%, right, Steve? So if you put like 3.25% growth in that equation rather than 1.7%, yes, David, you grow out of the problem. The curve goes like this, and actually you start reducing all that matters is how big your debt is as a share of your GDP.
I understand it.
So, but let me finish this point. So what does that mean? It means, look, I agree with Trump. He did not want to cut government spending. I agree with you, and I'd have arguments with him, but he didn't want to cut spending. But he understood the power of economic growth. And if you look at the policies that, I don't care if you like Trump or not. I always ask people, do you like Trump? Nah, I don't like him. Do you like his policies? Yeah, I like his policies. So my point is, what Biden has done, tell me one thing that Joe Biden has done, seriously, that's been good for economic growth.
Well, I'm not going to, I obviously
There's
don't.
Nothing.
I obviously
There's
don't.
Can anybody think of one thing Biden's done that's been good for the economy?
Steve, that's not the question. The question is,
so
the question is not whether Biden is bad.
So we have to put growth first.
I
Am
got
I wrong
it.
on this, Steve Forbes?
I got it. I'm going to turn to Grover in a minute, but you work for Trump. This is what I need to ask you. I don't care how much you're not going to get 6-7% economic growth anytime in the future.
We can get 3.5%.
We maybe can, but we're dealing with 3.5% economic growth with gazillions of dollars of debt. It's a different type of growth that's needed. What's needed right now is economic growth and cutting the size of the debt and government.
I agree with that.
Will Donald Trump do that?
The answer, well, one second. He came close. He came close. Trump passed Paul Ryan's tax cut, which was helpful. Thank you. But he did it better. He said
That was the Trump tax cut, not the Paul Ryan.
Was it? Okay.
That was
the Larry Kudlow,
I was
Steve
going to say, that was
Oh,
a Steve Moore,
okay.
Steve Forbes.
When I first read it, it was in Paul's desk 5 years before it got passed. But Trump did say, let's go to 15, which got up to 20. And it was very helpful that he asked for the lower number first. That was very useful. But he also said, let's take one of our welfare programs, means-tested program, not Social Security or Medicare, but Medicaid, and block grant it to the states. And if you do that and allow it to grow just with inflation, not beyond that, which it's doing now, you do begin to take the cost curve down. And we were within one vote of the House and the Senate passing it inside reconciliation. That was the vote McCain promised us and then decided not to give us that one day. Had we done that, you could do the same thing with food stamps and all the other welfare programs, the means-tested programs. That begins to take the cost curve bent down in a way that really matters. Add to that growth, and that's why I worry every day.
But what I don't hear from you is solid evidence that Donald Trump is committed to cutting all that stuff. Okay. He's kind of like for the welfare state and for cutting taxes.
Okay. The plan to block grant all the means-tested programs out was developed in Congress years ago, passed 4 times in the House under Obama, and once in the Senate under Obama. You couldn't pass it. When Trump was there, they put it together again, but only for Medicaid, and Trump was supportive. He did call McCain and insult him that morning, which may have had something to do with why we lost the bill, but because he was a yes until that. But he did that because he believed he had the vote and he could afford to. We were within one vote of having that level of savings, and so that can be done. And Trump was part of that. He was the president who said, yes, let's go ahead with that. On the growth part, we need to be careful about talking about deficit and debt, because Democrats have a solution to deficit and
raise
debt.
Taxes. Right.
Taxes, which sinks growth, okay? So we need to say the problem is we spend too much, we spend too much, we spend too much. We need to have tax cuts for growth and spending restraint in order to bring spending down. The left's position is, here's what we'll do. We'll spend so crazy that eventually the Republicans will panic and agree to a tax increase, specifically a VAT, a value-added tax. Now, they don't think they can get the VAT right away, because every country in the world that's ever put in a VAT, the government fell the next time there was an election. But you could start with, I don't know, how about a VAT on energy, a carbon tax? Or maybe we just start with a carbon tax at the border, as 2 Republicans have just recommended in the US Senate. Not 3, the one who was pulled off, but there are 2 there. Lindsey Graham and Cassidy out of Louisiana. So you start with, on the border, a tax on energy, then you go to a carbon tax, and then the oil companies will help you lobby to take the carbon tax to a VAT on everybody, with some slightly lower on them. That's the other team's plan. Get a VAT.
Well, they're
Europe.
horrible. We know that. But again,
no, but they're halfway there. We just need to be aware of all the steps it takes to get there.
I know that, but as we're talking about those steps, we are legitimately, if you listen to Stan Druckenmiller and a lot of other people, not just the only worry word out there, heading for this fiscal cliff, Steve. And I need to ask you again. You know Donald Trump is Mr. Junk Bond. Remember, this is the guy who what do you say? I love borrowing. I like Mr. Low Interest. What's that?
The king of debt.
I'm the king of debt.
Until it nearly sank him in 1990.
Okay, so the king of debt, is he actually going to cut stuff like Grover's talking about and Steve's talking about?
I'll say this. The next Republican president, whether it's Trump or somebody else, will realize what Steve just referred to. Growth cures a lot of problems. After World War II, we had debt 120% of GDP. We had a growing economy in the 50s and 60s, and by the end of the 60s, a little bit of restraint, Kennedy tax cuts, sound dollar, good as gold. The GDP ratio was 35%. Growth works over time. And for the entitlements, 2 things on that, quick things. On Social Security, we have enough wealth with that growth to meet the current obligations of people like my generation, the next 15 years. But for younger people, and this is where the Republicans fall into the trap of looking like they're going to take something away from you, say we're going to give something to younger people where the money, payroll money, goes into their own personal private accounts. They control it, not the politicians. You choose your retirement age, not Washington politicians. And young people, when they get that first paycheck, they realize they're accumulating something called capital, and they realize it's their labor that produces it, not politicians. The other thing on health care, Free markets we don't have in healthcare. We heard that from the previous panel. Yep. That is going to be changing, not only from the work they do, but from the very fact that every company now has a high deductible plan. It means people are starting to see real prices. They want to know what those prices are. And if you want to see the future of healthcare, go online, look at two things. Surgery Center of Oklahoma. They don't take insurance. They post prices, and their costs with board-certified surgeons, results as good or better than any hospital in all their surgeries. 25% of the cost of a typical hospital, free markets work. The other thing to look at is sesamecare.com, where you go on there, it's like Expedia, but for medical services. On Thursday, you can get an exam for $45, $50 off. That's what you're going to see when you get consumerism in healthcare, Medicare, and Medicaid, and Medicaid's going to go the way of giving people vouchers and the like. You're going to see those, you don't have to, the bottom line, Charlie, is on entitlements, there are two ways to do it. The growth way, which I just quickly described, or the root canal without anesthesia, which is what all too many Republicans prescribe.
Okay, no, I agree with this. But let me ask you this. Are you really saying that, Donald, that you don't have to cut the size of government, that we can grow our way out of this?
You can grow your way, and I mean,
it's kind of a non sequitur to compare it to after World War II. We destroyed half the world. We were the only game in town.
No. Look. We could have screwed up after World War II the way Britain did. Put in high taxes, nationalize everything. We did things pretty right after World War II. We got rid of wartime controls quickly. Britain didn't get rid of the last one until 1979.
There was no global competition, Steve?
Doesn't matter. We did things.
Either.
Yeah, and we did. We had an effective tax cut which reduced 50%, not by rates, but by how they figured how families paid income tax. We had the labor law, Taft-Hartley. We did things right. And when in the 60s, when Kennedy put those tax cuts in, we had a renewed bout of growth. We saw it with Reagan in the 80s. You create the right environment and amazing things happen. People do amazing things.
But how do you erase the debt that we have?
You don't erase the debt. You grow out of it. You slow the growth of it. And when you have a GDP, it's very basic. Assets, liabilities. When assets grow quickly, liabilities become less burdensome.
Steve,
and that's the only way to deal with it.
I want you to be right, but
Charlie,
I think
experience shows me right.
I'm going to bail you out, Charlie. I'm with you on it. We're in violent agreement on the theory.
Right.
These guys are I did my PhD in economic growth, right? Long-run economic growth made us the greatest country on earth. We're all in agreement. The issue is, it's not just Trump. If you'll notice, our Republican conference, we had Russ Vogt cut $17 trillion out of the $50 trillion in debt in a utopian, run at taking a leap of the debt. Freedom Caucus came in and said, it's too much, we'll do $4 trillion. Our speaker goes up to the White House, no cuts, right? So it's not just Trump, it's just in DC, it's very hard to cut spending. And so when you got a $7 trillion government now crowding out the private sector, it's not that I don't want economic growth, it's just hard to do that. And then when you look at the leading scholar in the world on productivity, Robert Gordon at Northwestern, productivity growth is at 1%. It's down from 6, 5, 4, 3 to 1. How do you get growth? Back under Reagan, I would die to have that productivity.
So I know a way we could cut almost $400 billion out of the budget tomorrow.
Right. Yep.
I mean, how many are with me on this? We just eliminate Joe Biden's $380 billion green energy slush fund.
Yeah.
Now,
which
by the way,
is really over $1 trillion.
Does anybody know, do you know who runs that program in the White House? I bet.
The $300
You're not going to believe this. This is by the way, I didn't say $380 million. I said $380 billion green energy slush fund. Anybody who know who runs that? John Podesta. John Podesta is just a Democratic political hack.
At CAP, right?
So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of the Department of Education. Let's get rid of the Department of Energy. Let's get rid of these damn programs. Let's get $250 billion was stolen of COVID funds. Yeah. Let's track those criminals down and get that money back. Right?
And by the way, the way you cut the budget is not the way we tried it in the 1990s, where you go after program after program. It's like trench warfare, and then they have a relaunch, and you lose the ground you gain. The way you do it is the way we did it in the 20s. You have a good, growing economy, And then people are not going to resist so much when you start to cut spending.
Oh, wait a
But if you
second.
try to cut spending when people are hurting, good luck.
Steve.
So good times get good cuts.
Steve,
We've done it before.
Why did we have good times under Donald Trump and no spending cuts then?
Because we cut taxes, we cut regulation, we had
Why didn't we cut spending?
You know, amazing policy. We produced American energy.
No, but why didn't we cut spending?
Let me just again one
The
example.
size of government, was as big under Trump or bigger than Barack Obama. Now it's much bigger now, but you know, I'm just saying
Charlie,
that these are
the
like
tax cut that we
yes.
did. That brought almost $2 trillion of capital from abroad into the United States.
No, I'm not saying it was that. That's
So
not.
those are huge.
No, these are two
But the
different
thing on
questions.
spending, the thing on spending is, I think there's an environment now that did not quite exist in 2017, that the budget is so out of control
Right, yeah, I
now.
agree.
What's
I agree
happened
with
in the
that.
last 4 years, now everyone realizes we got to do something about it. People see it when they go to the supermarket, the consequences of it. So now you have the environment in which this can be done, real cutting. And you have to do it in an environment of economic growth, so we do it all. Tax cuts, deregulation,
And you think
dollar as
Trump,
good
and
as
you think
gold.
Trump has the appetite to cut now? Finally.
I think he wants to, if he got into office, I think he wants to be a successful president, and the way you have to do it is tackle the budget. But I'll say this, the Republican president will tackle the budget.
Okay.
So Charles, you never answered that question. Do you think we're going to have a recession? Because you're watching these markets every day.
I do, and I don't know the severity of it. I just don't think you can, tamper with the interest rate policy and monetary policy as much as they've done, and not have some impact. Now, I've run this by. Don't curse me when I say this name, Larry Fink of BlackRock, who, believe it or not, he's a guy I know very well. I like the guy. He's very smart when it comes to markets and risk, and he made a good point that there's still gazillions of dollars sloshing around the economy, which is why they're going to have to.
Are you talking about Powell?
Excuse me?
Are you talking about Powell?
I'm talking about Larry Fink.
Oh, Fink.
I
Okay.
asked him about
right,
recession,
right.
and he follows this stuff because he has to. And I said, "Do you think we'll have one?" He goes, "The only thing I can tell you is that I think there'll be at least one, probably two more rate hikes, because there's just so much money sloshing around the economy."
is.
And at some point, when you take the Fed funds rate from 0 to what would it be if you did two more? It'd be 5.5, almost 6. I don't know. How do you not have a recession? How does mortgage prices, housing prices not move? So that would be my answer.
Let me just say one thing about this, because I know Steve Forbes agrees with me, because I learned all my economics from Steve. We as a movement have to get away with this, from this idiotic idea that raising interest rates is a way to reduce inflation. It's a stupid idea. I'm so sick and tired of Jerome Powell and the people at the Fed
But he's in
saying,
office, so it's going to happen.
saying,
So
why do they keep
why
saying they have
don't
to slow down the
this-
economy? We don't need to slow down the
but you
economy.
gotta-
We need it to grow
this
faster.
gets to a real flaw, again, of the Republican candidates. One, not having a very Reaganist program,
Right.
vigorous program. Why don't they learn how to go after the Federal Reserve
Exactly.
and relate what they're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
to what people are getting in the marketplace?
I agree, but I think Powell was appointed by Trump, but then Trump had buyer's remorse, and we do remember that. And the
He's a
other thing-
bipartisan disaster.
Yeah, and by the way, the other thing is, he's not going anywhere. So just remember, we're talking real politics here, and what he's probably going to do is raise rates one more time, probably two, and I think there'll be a recession. Let me talk to, since we're on the whole notion of growth, and it was funny. Pat Buchanan used to take side shots at Steve Forbes all the time about cut taxes and create the great rock candy mountain that's going to appear out of the sky.
Reagan did it. Kennedy did it.
I know.
Coolidge did it.
I just thought it was fun. It was
I'd have
always
loved to have
funny.
been
Like
in that
Jack Kemp,
company.
if you cut taxes, you solve any problem. But I'm kind of in that camp. Okay. One of the headwinds to growth, though, is trade. And I know everybody here was once called. We once thought ourselves as free traders. Me too. I was covering one of the Republican debates for Fox Business, and I said something about Trump where I said, he's anti-free trade, but I don't, he's for fair trade. I said something like that. I said, if you really take him at his word, he's for fair trade. He actually emailed me immediately. He goes, thank you, Charlie, we're on the same page. It was pretty funny. I still have the email. So one of the few times he's ever said that to me. So the real question is, though, cracking down on unfair trade policies, cracking down on China, probably took a couple points off GDP. Can you be and then so that's kind of bad, obviously. It gets in the way of your ability to grow ourselves out of it. But on the other hand, China is one of the most, pernicious forces in the world right now. How do we stay as free traders in this environment and sort of walk the tightrope with China and these other bad players?
People mean different things when they talk about fair trade. China and France and other countries steal our intellectual property, okay? That's not fair. That needs to be dealt with. They, in their tariffs, want to regulate all sorts of stuff that they have tariff and non-tariff barriers against the United States. The idea that tariffs are American tariffs against China are taxes on American consumers who buy things from China or from any other country. Tariffs are taxes on the American tariffs are taxes on the American people. If China puts up tariffs, it's a tax on the Chinese people, okay? If we don't like China, why we punish the American people with higher tariffs and higher costs is beyond me. In a trade war, which are all optional wars, all of the casualties are self-inflicted. It's all friendly fire. We put up tariffs and hurt Americans, American consumers. And what you do is you then create opportunities for a particular industry, the steel industry, American, to raise their prices to screw the auto industry and everybody else who uses steel. So you can't do it without damaging the American economy. And I know it's difficult for some people to follow. Well, we'll make Mexico pay for the wall or something. It's not the way it works. Tariffs are paid by America. American tariffs are paid by Americans.
Absolutely, and we did pay for it.
Yeah.
And I want to go to Steve. I have a special question for you.
Yeah, I don't think China took 1% or 2% off of GDP, maybe 0.1 or 0.2 off of GDP.
Okay.
But we're doing free trade with a totalitarian communist surveillance state, just to make the moral case clear. Now, the one thing I do know for sure is that 2049 is their 100th year anniversary. And the one thing I know by 2049 is they're going to take Taiwan. And so RAND, the defense analyst firm, did a little study on the consequence of a Taiwan war. No boots on the ground in China, nothing. The GDP hit to the United States of America from a war over just Taiwan is 5 to 10% of GDP. That's your markets down 50% on a good day. The GDP hit to China was 10 to 20%. So you can make your last nickel of profits with China all the way to that point. And they've done their math on Tiananmen. They know it takes about 15 years for the American memory and the world's memory to go away on atrocities. And so do the math on 2050 minus 15, and we're in the little countdown clock. And so I'm much more concerned about that huge number than the specificity on trade agreements, right, where I agree with you. There's a harm to a consumer, but compared to death, I'll take,
Well, yeah, of course. And I want to ask Steve Moore this. I disagree with your numbers. I think it was much more than 0.2 or whatever. Yeah. And I think that way because, I mean, just you saw what happened in the agriculture industry. Agriculture, farmers were selling stuff to China. They couldn't anymore. And I'd like to ask Steve this. You're kind of in the administration, kind of in the shadow administration as well. Who developed this sort of blunt force hammer instrument of trade? I mean, I remember listening to, or I might have spoken to him directly, Gary Cohn, who was the head of the NEC under Trump for a time before Kudlow became it, talking about being specific and targeted with China. Go after their stealing of our trade secrets, but don't screw over the U.S. farmer. Who in there said, let's just take the sort of hatchet to them and screw them, and let the cost. Let's not worry about the cost.
So, I learned a lot about trade from just talking to Trump about it and trying to understand his philosophy. And if you want to understand Donald Trump, you have to read his book. What is his book? The Art of the Deal. And this guy is a negotiator. He's a really good negotiator. And what he understood, and by the way, and so he has changed my thinking a little bit about trade. I've always been a Milton Friedman free trader. What Trump was trying to do, Trump recognized something. The world is this. The United States is the hub of the world economy, and every other country is a spoke. And that's even true still with China, trying to catch up with us. And so he realizes the power of leverage. The United States has leverage over every other country. If we did stop trading with China, you're right, it would do great damage to American consumers, but it would bankrupt China. China can't possibly grow without having access to US markets. And Trump understood that. And so he used that leverage, and I think a fairly effective way.
So you think he was much more targeted than I'm giving him credit for?
I think
What
he was doing was trying to force these countries, and by the way, it's not just China. Europe is huge tariffs on American goods. What he was doing is saying, we're going to hit you over the head with a billy club. Now, it's a risky strategy, and Grover may not agree with me on this, but he was able to force these countries. Remember with the NATO, it's a perfect example. It's not trade, but he said, come on, you guys are going to pay your NATO bills, right? For 30 years, they wouldn't pay it. And he said, if you're not going to pay your NATO bills, we're out of here. And guess what? What did they do? They paid their NATO bills. So I like this idea of using American leverage to get these, I mean, how many agree with it? Let's get these countries to do what they say they're going to do.
Well,
I mean, they don't.
Everybody's for that. But, and before I go to Steve, I want to just. I think
I really stuck a hornet's nest with that one.
I think you agree with me. Too much of a blunt hammer, correct?
Well, and what did we get for it? I mean, Germany's on a 25-year path to getting to where they said they would be 25 years ago. I mean, the Europeans have been promising this. Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, the guys on the front lines pay their bills. It used to be France, with Germany protecting them between them and Russia, that didn't want to do anything. Now the Germans are going, ha, you know, we don't have to pay because Poland will take it. But Poland is being very good, and Eastern Europe is being very good, but the Germans aren't really still. Even their promises are many years in the future of getting up to do this. They can afford to shut down their nuclear power plant, but they can't afford to defend themselves.
Okay, Steve, was our trade war with China net good or bad for the American people?
I think it would have been better if from the beginning he had vigorously proposed, and he did rebuild the military, rebuilding our Navy and say, we're not going to do what Barack Obama did and allow the Chinese to try to turn international waterways into Chinese lakes with those man-made islands, and done vigorous military stuff, diplomatic stuff against China. That would have gotten their attention and would have been very effective.
The trade war, I'm talking about specifically the trade war.
But I'm saying on the trade war, tariff is a tax, and tax is not part of my vocabulary. and so I'd have taken a different approach. And
what would you have done? What would you have done?
Oh, with China, very, very, very simple in terms of the intellectual property.
Focus
that's an
on
easy,
that myopically.
Not myopically. That's the one thing you do. Call it laser, not myopic. But also rebuild our military, especially our Navy, especially our submarines, which, as Newt pointed out, is our most effective way of defending Taiwan. So if the Chinese the problem with the world today is Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea believe we are a declining power. And they've believed that since the 2008 economic crisis. And what Reagan did to turn around that perception, which was around the world in the 70s, was a vigorous military buildup, massive tax cuts to revive the economy. The world saw that we are growing. Soviet Union stagnated and eventually imploded. That's what you do with a country like China, show you have the military and economic might and learn to apply it, not what this crowd does, which says one thing and then undermines Israel, got to do about Hamas, but let's take a holiday. We had no holidays against the terrorists of the Nazis in World War II, no holiday against these terrorists here. And so that's the approach I would have taken, and I would have worked to reduce trade barriers. But I think the American example of reducing barriers to doing business, it's worked before and it can work again. When the world sees America strong, the world gets more backbone.
That's great.
Europe, NATO, is spending more as a percentage of GDP on defense than Taiwan is. They're not taking this seriously. We should be talking to them about building the submarines that we were talking about earlier. They could fill that area with submarines they pay for. They're not paying for their own defense. They're worse free riders than the Europeans are, and they're, I would have thought, in more danger. I don't know why that's been tolerated, but do keep in mind, China, from 2015 to 2014, that 25-year period, is going to increase the number of people over the age of 55 by 250, and reduce the number of people under 55 by 250, and it gets worse from there.
Let me get granular.
They're declining in total numbers of people, and they've got all that malinvestment because they built cities that go to nowhere.
And by the way, their accounting is all over the place. You don't know. But I want to get really granular here. Can we have our cake and eat it too in opposing China? Can we thread the needle where we focus on intellectual property and allow our farmers to sell them wheat? Can we do this in a way where we don't screw ourselves having a trade war with China? Is there a possibility?
We did it with the Soviet Union. No reason why we can't do it with China. It's having the backbone to follow through. And by the way, on Ukraine, just one little factoid. If you take humanitarian military aid to Ukraine as a percent of GDP, the U.S. ranks about 10th. Countries like Poland, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, the frontline countries, are doing far more because they know they're the target.
So you think we can have our cake and eat it too by focusing on the intellectual property and allowing the other things to just happen, the free trade?
Yeah, because when we have good economic policies, you bake more cake, and we can eat more.
You disagree with that, I can tell.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think we got a lost decade coming because of the real economy. You can't, in case you all missed the memo, the Israel tragedy has pointed out what human capital in the Ivy League schools look like right now. And instead of the Judeo-Christian tradition, that's why I said we have an intentional attack upon the central values and virtues of the United States of America. And so who are the generals? You know, I agree. In the Reagan days, my God, give me the liberals to debate with. We're not debating liberals anymore. Obama kind of goofed up when he was in, so he went all in on the Marxist thing. They got every spigot at full. So I would love to have economic growth. No, we're not going to have our cake and eat it too. Well, all of the economic fundamentals are in the wrong direction.
You know, I just had dinner with Trump about 3 weeks ago, Larry Kudlow and I and Kevin Hass and a few others. And I asked him, I said, you know, what is the first thing you will do when you're back in the White House? And he said, without hesitating, he said, Steve, you're going to love this. He said, I'm going to have a stack of papers 1 inch thick on my desk. And every one of them will be an executive order repealing everything Joe Biden has done to our economy. So that sounds pretty damn good. So look, we are entering the most exciting time in the history of the human planet. I mean, this is going to be incredible.
Why is it so
exciting? You thought
exciting?
the internet was amazing.
Right, AI. What do I got to look forward to tomorrow?
The productivity improvements from AI, robotics, all these things, genetic, and it's incredibly exciting.
And it won't matter how much debt. And it won't matter how much debt we have.
What's that?
It matters how much debt. What matters is how we're dealing with the debt. We deal with it with growth. With a sound dollar, and countries have had worse debt problems before. And by the way, you cut, but you have to cut in an environment where it can be done, like it was done in the 20s. Coolidge was the only president who left office with a budget smaller than when he went into office.
It was the 20s.
So it's like the Constitution. Constitution's 250 years old, still relevant today.
But he was shrinking a much smaller government. It was more work to find stuff to cut back. It's a lot easier today to find stuff to cut back.
And by the way, the reference to the woke wars, just as the COVID crisis got American parents to see what was happening in education, leading to the rise of education savings accounts, the tragedy of October 7th has allowed Americans to see graphically the rot that is in our institutions, and there's now a counterattack and counteroffensive against that rot.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. Okay, so I really do believe our ruling class is some of the dumbest people in the world. Not just in Washington, and ideologically blinded, and that to me is dumb. You know, if you allow your ideology to, supersede common sense, you're an imbecile, in my view. And then that's what we have in Lena Khan at FTC and Gary Gensler at the SEC, and go on and on. We also have a huge CEO class that, in my view, are imbeciles in many ways, because they allowed something to happen that is eating at the very fabric of capitalism right now. So here's something interesting. I'm doing a book about woke capitalism. It's called Go Woke, Go Broke. Hopefully it'll be out by the summer of next year. I looked at an interesting chart in researching this. I looked at productivity declines, and I noticed when it really started hitting the shitter, so to speak. It was around, I don't know, you would know better than me, 2015, 2016, real declines, right? I also noticed when ESG started going up, 2015, 2016. If you don't know what ESG is, it's a sort of way of managing a company in an environmental, social, and governance way, which sounds good. It's like affirmative action, like you don't really know what it means, but it's really nefarious. And affirmative action is quotas. ESG is you do everything you can to cut your carbon footprint, everything, even if you're an oil company, so you force oil companies to stop drilling. G means you have good, not just like staggered boards of directors, but you literally have hiring quotas. The S, I'm not really quite sure what that means. Yeah, it's like social. It means like, you know, you give back to you ignore shareholders and you become a stakeholder. Right. Those two trends happened. How did the CEO class of this country do something so self-defeating? Because when it comes down to productivity hurts them. It hurts their companies. And I mean, you've been around these guys for years. Why?
It's, I think, fundamentally the lack of growth we've had for 20 years.
Is this them becoming woke, so to speak?
And these bad ideas get traction. You saw that in the 1930s. None of the totalitarian ideas of the 1930s suddenly came out of nowhere. They've been brewing for a long time, but the bad environment allowed the toxicity to grow. But now there's been a reaction. ESG has been under fire. Larry Fink is now saying, "Oh, I'm really a capitalist. Believe me, believe me." And
trust me, I know. He tells me every day.
Yeah. So the reaction has started, just like we're doing in education. This whole wokeism, the bad things arise, and now people are realizing what's happened in our schools, what happened in terms of what Newt said, brainwashing our kids in college. It only takes, as he says, 7% to go bad can have the possibility of infecting the whole system, just as a few bad cells can infect the whole body. Now the antibodies are coming to the fore. We have to fight this thing, because Newt is right. They won't go away. They're going to have to be fought. But you can have more successes when you have a vibrant economy where people are doing great things. And just when you said, well, what's the future? AI? Yeah, huge. And a product called graphene, which is discovered 20 years ago. It's the strongest material ever discovered, 200 times the strength of steel. Oh. In terms of conducting electricity, 10,000 times better than copper. Why haven't we done more with it? Because it was hideously expensive to make. Now, in Rice University and elsewhere, they're making huge breakthroughs on making it something that we can use in healthcare, constructing buildings, highways, and the like. So that's the future. Stuff that sounds magic today, as they say, is going to become a commonplace tomorrow.
Graphene sounds like a type of cannabis when you first said it. But I want to ask Grover this. Just, Grover, did all the CEOs, let's get back to my core question, how CEOs went from, let's not be political, you know, I don't want to piss off anybody, I want to sell stuff, to let's be the economic arm of the Democratic Party seen through the eyes of AOC. Did they all go for the same lobotomy at the same friggin' time? Because something happened here.
It's not a secret. You can ask them, okay? And they'll tell you, Grover, when I hear a conservative criticize something, there are 100 coming in from the other side all day, and grown-ups. And half of the criticism from Republicans is, we'll bash you in the head if you, what? Not, we'll cut your taxes, we want to work with you, we think we want to help give you more freedom. It's, you get some people who got on our team who want to pass the laws every bit as destructive to their ability to create value as the left wanted. So even our voices are not positive voices. And they're playing, we weren't. And who do we bring to CPAC or to conservative? Groups like this, do we bring business leaders and so on, which we do here? Or do we bring the guys who scream on cable TV?
Me?
And not you.
I take that personally.
I've never been to CPAC, just so you know.
The ones who lead very colorful and interesting lives that we read about in the newspapers as conservative leaders. Right. That's who we put forward instead of business leaders who are doing great things and inventing great products. We should be working with and celebrating that and politely, cheerfully pushing back, so help them fight the left. but the other team is much more is focused on this.
And by the way, the companies are now learning there are consequences to it.
Well, that's
Coca-Cola deeply regretted getting involved in that whole Georgia voting law.
Target,
and Delta, the same thing.
Yeah.
They realized their consequences. So again, fight back, as Grover said.
That
But
Bud
there
Light
was no
story, by the way,
counterpush.
that's the biggest story
I think you're right.
of the year.
I think you're right.
And it's such an amazing story because this woman, I don't know how much you know about the background of this, this woman who came up with this dingbat scheme, what was she, like #1 in Harvard Business School?
Well,
and she was
not
gonna
quite. I can tell you who she is, and I can tell you a lot about her.
And by the way, Bud Light, their market capitalization fell by $32 billion. And what it really shows, by the way, is that corporate America doesn't really understand America. They really don't. There are more of us that are sane people than there are of them. It's just that they are the one, as my dear old departed mom used to say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
I'm going to unpack what you said a little bit because I'm, like I said, I'm writing a book about this. I've been interviewing all the people at Budweiser about this. Actually, InBev, AB InBev. Her name is Alyssa Heinerscheid, a very brilliant marketer. If you look at some of her past advertising campaigns, which makes it so crazy that she did this thing with a trans woman giggling in a bubble bath. Just think about that. If you're a beer drinker, do you really want to see a trans woman in a bubble bath giggling? I mean, it's like, Spuds McKenzie was like with bikini-clad women, and we go from that to this. So, in any event, this woman, Alyssa Heinerscheid, who's head of marketing for Bud Light, does this great Miles Teller ad, Budweiser ad during the Super Bowl, with him and his dog and his wife dancing, drinking. It was cute. She did a very artistic one about Game of Thrones. So you got to ask yourself, how did she come up with this shit? Which is my question that I've been asking. And here's where it really comes down to. The company is called AB InBev. It's run by these Brazilian, Belgian dudes. They're cost-cutting lunatics. They're also Davos men. They instituted very heavy DEI policies that permeated throughout the entire company, including their social media influencers. When it came time to figure out social media influencers, and they have about 150 of them, they said, okay, we need, because they've been moving in this direction because of DEI, gender diverse social media influencers. And if you want to get a gender diverse social media influencer, trust me on this, the first person that will come up is Dylan Mulvaney. She interviewed the president. She chronicled her 365 days of girlhood. She can be seen playing with tampons and generating gazillions of views on social media. And, I interviewed Ted Cruz about this, and Ted said something very interesting. So I believe Alyssa Heinerscheid was under pressure to bring her in. That's been all my reporting. So I'm not dissolving her responsibility, but I'm telling you, there was an edict from above. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, why are they doing this? Why would they say yes to this, and how stupid it is? And here's one of the things. Do you know Budweiser violated the law? Dylan Mulvaney has millions of TikTok followers. The average age of a TikTok follower in many cases, 20% is below 18. They essentially were marketing to kids beer when Dylan Mulvaney got up there and was giggling in the bubble bath. It's really quite remarkable, but it began at the top.
Yeah, for me, the obvious is this country's lost track of the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? And so there's a book by George Marsden called The Soul of the American University, From Protestant Establishment to Established Non-Belief.
Right.
Or you can read Alan Bloom for The Greatest Indictment of Higher Ed, The Closing of the American Mind, which is just a summary of where we are now. We've lost all ability to think, all rationality, all reason. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they no longer believe in reason, et cetera. And our Western tradition has lost its way.
All
and
true.
You're seeing this across the world.
All true, but I'm going to stop you there, and I want to press you on this.
Yeah.
How did we go
Yeah.
from Jack Welch, which, trust me, Jack Welch wasn't a particularly religious guy, I know him, but he was very conservative, spit out curses, used to curse at me all the time. But anyway, Jack Welch to Jamie Dimon
Yep.
and Larry Fink.
Right.
How did corporate America, which was once defined by a guy that was into Six Sigma and
Yep.
you know, productivity at all costs, and drill down into you make sure you're satisfying your customers, and yes, the shareholder is number one, to this weird thing where we're kind of, you know, we're like quasi-socialist members of the world. Again, how did that happen, that transformation?
Well, yeah.
Was it a lobotomy at one? Like,
No,
was it a 3-day lobotomy or
No,
something?
I'll give you the long-run trajectory with some greater names than those guys. Moses, Adam Smith, roughly Scottish Presbyterian, and James Madison, who stuck around at Princeton and studied Hebrew and wrote the Constitution. So these guys are living off the borrowed time and the heavy lifting of all of the parents who used to work several jobs to put their kids and sacrificed for the sake of this country, and the military who fought for this country. And that legacy, you can live off it for a decade or 2 or 3 or 4, and that's what you're seeing.
Right.
But it's fading fast, as you're seeing in world events right now. And if we don't get back to it, it's not that there's no ethics. There's no such thing as ethics, right? There's Christian ethics.
You still haven't really answered. No one's answered the question how we go from right to left in about.
They've lost their moral foundation.
The CEO
There's no
class
moral foundation.
in literally in 5 years or so. I mean, it's remarkable.
Well, part of
Dallas
it
is
is
part of
the left has been very good at occupying the high moral ground.
I think you're right about that.
So when they would come in and pressure, executives would say, gee, I want to show that I'm not just a grubby materialist. I believe in social blah, blah, blah. And then so far we haven't taken Adam Smith's other part, moral sentiments, and gotten on the high moral ground.
Although there is a price to be paid if you advertise tuck-friendly swimsuits, as we know, at Target, because they're still reeling. They're giving me the
bottom line is people are now reacting.
I agree.
The DNA of this country is still good, and the 91% is now going against the 7.
The American people are still great. Our leaders are morons.
So we get new leaders.
But we've been talking about how regulations built up over the last 20, 30 years. There isn't a corporate leader who can't be had by the state, okay? So as the Democrats take over the presidency and they tell everybody, go sick yourself on SEC or whatever, on these guys, unless maybe they do what we want on these issues. Part of the threat to them is not liberals yelling at them or the press yelling at them, it's government threatening to kneecap them.
Although in my research, great, and they're giving me the hook, the great expansion of ESG and woke capitalism occurred during the Trump years. I'm not saying
Trump didn't run the federal government. The bureaucracy ran the federal government.
Don't let the American
negative
people off the hook, because K-12 is a result of us parents being passive for 40
Look,
years.
they're telling me, they're killing me.
You're killing us. Right.
We're done.